Everyone keeping well at the time as well. I'm going to hand over to our third speaker, who is Peter Lipman, who is Policy Director for Sustrans and Chair and Trustee of the Transition Network. And our first two speakers have very ably looked beyond their emphasis, not just business, not just social, but looking at the triple bottom line. Here's the explicit reference to the environmental considerations in Parliament. Peter.
I know we've got question and answer later, but if I say things that people really want to ask about, put your hand up and indicate. It's slightly uncomfortable for me to be talking about the environmental case because I don't distinguish between environmental and economic and social, and I'll kind of come back to that. But I wanted to start just by explaining a bit about transition network and the role of the transition initiatives. That depends on what I'm talking about. Transition initiatives are community-led responses to climate change and toil, seeking to maximise resilience and happiness. And one of the tools that they use for that is to work on a kind of community, where do you want to be in 20 years' time? Very like the idea of what does Southwark look like in 20 years' time. So one of the tools that initiatives use is something called an energy descent action plan, which is how would, for example, a part of Bristol or Nest, which was the first one to embark on this process, how would that look in 20 years if we weaned ourselves off our addiction to fossil fuels, to the fuels that cause climate change and a whole load of other things. And that's where peak oil comes in as well. Peak oil, which probably most people have heard of now, peak oil is not running out of oil. Peak oil is when the supply of oil has reached its maximum, and therefore supply and demand don't fit in. And of course what you start to get then is price volatility, the sort of thing we're seeing now. And that has immense impact on our community, particularly those in our communities who are less able to cope with that sort of thing. And one of the things that happens then is you start to get cuts. So thinking about where we stand now in terms of working around in Parliament, we're being told that budgets have to be cut. Why is that? Well, until the 1960s, Britain used to make a lot of things, sell them to the rest of the world. And we had coal, but we imported oil. And then in the 1960s, we discovered North Sea oil and gas, and we started to offshore our manufacturing and making things. We started to sell energy to the rest of the world, and that's how we balanced our books. And British oil and gas peaked around 2000. Since then, the yields from the North Sea have been declining very fast, and we've been having to import it just as it got much more expensive. What's the impact on us? Well, in 2008, when oil prices last peaked, energy was 20% of our overall balance of payments deficit, and that's just getting worse as our reserves decline and we have to import more and more. And this is one of the reasons why we're faced with the cuts that we're now faced with, which has immense impacts on what everyone is able to do. So the transition reaction to that is to say, how do we wean ourselves off that addiction? And of course, if we don't, we'll start to see things which combine devastating environmental and social and economic impacts. Just to give you one example of what's going on at the moment in Britain, is that as we seek to find indigenous gas, we're starting to use a process called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. And the first explorations of this are going on in Lancashire at the moment. Now, the communities in the United States that have been faced with fracking have had their lives totally devastated. There's a film going around at the moment which shows a film of people turning their taps on and actually being able to set fire to the water that comes out of their taps. Because what you do when you indulge in fracking is you basically drill holes into the ground, pump very toxic chemicals into the shale in the ground in order to force the gas out. And that gas partly comes out where you want it to, but partly goes everywhere. So we're seeing communities that are devastated environmentally, but also devastated socially because you have trucks hammering through the towns and the villages all the time. Also devastated economically because your whole basis for having a local economy is changed once you let this happen. So for me, they bind in every time, and I can't separate the three out. So I wanted to give you some examples of the sorts of things that transition and touchstones we do when we're seeking to address these issues. So I took one from Bristol, because that's where we are. Transition Bristol at the moment has just got some initial seed funding to set up a Bristol regional town. So that would be a local economy. That would be not just a physical printed note, although that would be part of it. It will also be electronically available via the web and via people's mobile phones. And we're doing this in partnership with Bristol Credit Union. And the idea was, it's all very well setting up local currencies and having ways in which local people can buy local products, local producers can be able to connect to local people, but unless you enable the people who most suffer under our current system of a credit-based economy, where if you live in the wrong part of Bristol, you haven't got a local bank, you're not going to get credit, then what are we going to do? So we thought the logical partner with Bristol Credit Union. That will be live, I hope, by October this year. And the aim is not just environmental in terms of making things happen locally, making shorter supply chains, so producers in Somerset and all around who produce food and have a natural way of marketing their goods here in Bristol. It's also about enabling people who currently don't have access to our normal financial systems to get more access. And it's also going to be community owned as an enterprise. Another example, also local, reasonably local, because that deals with money, which is of course is a major part of what's going on, a major grid, but there's the energy grid. What are we going to do to enable community-owned renewables? And over in Bath Community Energy has now set up. They are looking in conjunction with Baines Council to supply hydropower, solar power and wind power. Again, community owned. It's going to be a community interest company. I think the full one is going to be an industrial and property society, but both of them are looking at what are the ownership models which enable these interventions. And I would say both of those interventions combine all three of those things: environmental, economic and social. And then just up the road in Stroud, there's been a big focus on food. So one of the things they did, again with an agenda of making things local, was they clubbed together in order to buy a farm. So they had a community-owned farm close to Stroud, about 200 families, paying roughly £37 a week, employing 3 local people to actually work on the farm. But if you buy into this, you also have to put some time into working on the farm yourself. And they're getting local food, and they're supporting local jobs. And then they've also set up Stroud Food Co, which is a distribution centre for local food producers, which delivers into school every Saturday morning. And that enables the producers to get higher than wholesale prices, but the local people to get decent local healthy food at a price they can afford. So it's a combination of the sorts of things that transition initiatives are doing in response to the imperatives we face.